Mrs. Leighanne Small is the International Middle Years Curriculum IMYC Coordinator at Hillel Academy, an international school in Kingston, Jamaica. She has been an educator for 5 years at Hillel Academy and teaches IGCSE Biology and IMYC General Science. In 2019, Leighanne became the IMYC Coordinator. The preparatory school is now expanding beyond the IMYC curriculum by adding the International Primary Years Curriculum, or IPC, this September. I would like to warmly welcome Leighanne to our specialist series. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Leighanne, I just wanted to ask, because whenever we start an interview here, we like to know a little bit of the backstory. So we'd like to know what led you to education and tell us a little bit more about your school.
Okay, so I actually had all plans of becoming a medical doctor. My mother beat that into my head from, when I was really young. But once I got to around grade 9, I found that my teachers were very, very impactful on my life. I had teachers who believed in me, teachers who went the extra mile to ensure, that I was passionate about learning, passionate about specifically the sciences because I'm a science teacher. And I thought after a while, I need to give this to the next generation. So teaching education for me is from the passion of trying to give back what I received from amazing educators.
Wow. And can you tell us a little bit about your school, where you are?
Right, so Hillel Academy is in Kingston, Jamaica, as you had said. Lovely school. We have students from all over the world. A lot of our students move around the world, whether in diplomatic kind of, families or so. We have IGCSE, we have IB, of course, IMYC, which is what we're talking about here. And we're looking into making sure that on our preparatory side, we have field work going all the way up. So that's what we're looking into overall right now.
Fantastic. So it sounds like the passion that was instilled into you at an early age is now your kind of legacy that you're passing on as being a teacher in your school and an IMYC coordinator.
For sure. That is what I want. I mean, I even see my teachers who taught me when I was in high school, and I just tell them what I'm doing and I remind them it's because of them. So for sure.
Wow. Standing on the shoulders of giants.
Indeed.
So in the International Middle Years Curriculum, or IMYC, we have something called the process to facilitate learning. And this process is repeated many times throughout an academic year, providing familiarity and routine to a student's learning journey. Now, the process starts with what we call the entry point. And the entry point is an activity for students that begins each unit of learning and provides an exciting introduction to the learning that is to follow. It serves to prime learners for new learning through promoting curiosity and generating excitement for an upcoming topic or unit. So, with your experience, Leighanne, in the classroom, what are some of the key aspects to keep in mind when preparing for an entry point?
I think one of the biggest things is student interest. So I binge watch Nickelodeon, binge watch Disney Channel. I spy on them all the time, though they don't know. So when they're at lunch, I'm listening to what music are they listening to, what movies are in, because I'm learning more and more that I'm getting old because I have no idea what they're talking about. And so it's really important to stay relevant. And so we'll have, for example, we'll hear them talking about a movie. And so I'll watch the movie. And when I'm watching the movie, I already have the themes in mind. And I'm already trying to make up in my mind, how can I turn this into an analogy, to ensure that I bring this theme across? What are the themes? The themes for IMYC are very general, but very useful. How can I identify themes in the shows they watch, in the music, in just their hobbies? And so I'm one of the biggest things is knowing the students. I think it's also important to diversify your approaches or to differentiate. So, for example, let's say they're learning resilience. Having them solve a puzzle, my bad. Having them solve a puzzle on a mountain while climbing the mountain, while ensuring that there's also something else that they won't be able to figure out until the end, having it diversified. And then the final thing would be reflection. Because what I've found is when I just started out in planning these entry points, is I'd have them do the activity and I'd be like, good, now you know adaptability. But I found that some of them later on would be like, Miss, how did that connect? And I'm like, are you kidding me? And so sometimes we take for granted that because we've done these flamboyant trips or activities, the students really have understood, what we're trying to bring across. Making sure that I have valuable reflection questions at the end of whatever activities we've done that bring them to truly appreciate not just the theme, the word, but the big idea and what that really means. Those are, I think, some fundamentals for planning an entry point activity.
Fantastic. And that's a great point about staying relevant, because the more you stay relevant, the more you're speaking the language of
Right.
students in the classroom, in the school. So that's a really good point. And the reflection as well. Yeah. So what are some of the ways in which all teachers at the school participate in organizing and creating an entry point instead of just one or two members? And why is it important to have the whole school contribute to creating entry points?
Okay, so what we have is at the start of each term, we have a mass IMYC meeting. All teachers from grade 7 to 9, the middle years, will come together. And of course, the themes are pre-established. So what we do is we have an Excel file with the names of teachers who will be planning for each theme for that term, because it's grade 7, grade 8, grade 9, and then there are 2 themes per term. So that allows us to create small groups of probably about 9 or so teachers that can focus on a specific theme and focus on planning for that big idea. So they're provided with templates. Recently it's been more breakout rooms, but usually there would have been different sections, and they're given the opportunity to talk. Of course, each group has a group leader, because we do have an IMYC committee, so we take those committee leaders and we ensure that they are in charge, and they come back. They're given specific time to plan. They come back and they share their ideas and receive feedback from the rest of the group. So by the time I'm supposed to be coordinating, I have pretty solid foundation from the teachers, on what they're thinking. And so I can tweak, I can modify, or I can just keep it in many cases because they've done so well. And the reason why this is important is no individual is an expert in everything, and even, sometimes I'll sit and I'll come up with my own ideas for these entry points just as a backup or so. And when I hear the ideas that the teachers have, I'm mind blown. Like, I'm blown away at just the different angles, specifically, even because they are coming from different subject areas. And because I'm a science teacher, I've found that even though you don't want it to be this way, sometimes it's having a science bias, in the planning of entry points. So for example, something along the lines of, if we're looking, let's say we're looking at adaptability, it's immediately the first thing that would come to my mind would be something along the lines of how we've had changes in science as time went on, or so. But then when you get the PE teacher involved and you get the geography teacher involved, or you get a more balanced type of entry point. So that's one of the benefits. Another thing is, this one is a side note, I guess, or I guess what you'd say is an indirect benefit. Teachers become more passionate and more engaged when they belong to something. So when it's not top down, or it's not so centralized, teachers become passionate because they were a part of this planning thing. This is their idea that they're seeing unfolding in front of the students. And when teachers are passionate and engaged, students will benefit for sure. So those are just some of the benefits.
That's really, yeah, I couldn't agree more with what you just said. Now, you had mentioned about the committee, an IMYC committee. Can you tell us a little bit about that? How does that work?
Right. So I got a committee just to ensure that I had persons who were able to give me feedback on what's going on. So for example, as I said, I'm science focused, and it doesn't mean that I can't appreciate and understand other subjects. But by having teachers from different departments who would be able to go into classes with me to look at what's happening in the classroom, or even something as simple as, on the committee, we have someone who's very artistic. And so what does that look like when we want to bombard bombard the students with the theme for the next 6 weeks. So that person, their responsibility is creating those posters, or at least creating a template, because actually it's our students who design the posters or who will color them in, but just making sure they're neat, giving oversight to that. And so I don't even have to think about notice boards or the students being bombarded, because of established structure, which is one of the IMYC themes. That formal arrangements give rise to order. We need that. And so it's just identifying different expertise. One of the persons on the committee is IT, and so making sure, so even something along the lines of when they then look at an entry point, they'll be able to say, but there's an application that does all of this. Why did they type out? Why we don't have to go this route? And you're like, wow, thank you for saving my life. I don't want to be reinventing a wheel. I don't have to. And so the committee is really, we meet once a month on the first of each month, unless that's a weekend. And it's also just important for them to give oversight. Sometimes they see angles you're not seeing as a coordinator. And so they say, I realize that some of the students were saying they don't really get how this theme relates to math. Maybe we need to look into math class. And so we get more eyes on the ground, which is important, more surveillance.
Fantastic. And you also mentioned about the breakout rooms. So doing things online, how has that been with the breakout rooms?
Well, it's been good. It started shaky, I promise you. I think both teachers and students have gotten the opportunity in many cases to, I guess, adapt, everything that I say is a theme in IMYC, but to adapt to, the changes that COVID-19 carried about. But what I'll say is, even just for the students, they miss the trips, they miss the hands-on. So as much as we have adapted and we are grateful, for technology and how it's benefited us in this time, they're asking, Miss, when are we going on another trip? Or Miss, when are we doing a virtual a virtual game or so? Will never be the same for them as that social simulation they get face to face. So we're hoping, we don't know, but we're hoping to be face to face in September.
Oh, and I hope many schools are probably hoping that same thing.
Right.
So great. Well, thank you for sharing that. And it sounds like you've got a well-structured system in place of how you create those entry points. So here's another question I have for you. How can a school make the entry point engaging when they might not have much time to implement it?
I think one of the beneficial things to do is a flipped classroom model. So a very similar thing to what we do if we're running out of time, or we just want to focus on something else, more closely in class time. So for example, having them do something crazy or wacky at home, and then now we're only focusing on reflection questions when we come in to really bring the point home, or something, whatever it is. When we don't have enough contact time in class, the first thing I'd say is reflect on what are the things that we don't really need to be doing here. So that's one of the only things I can think of when I think of just being more efficient with time. But I promise you, when the students get the entry points face to face, hands on, you see them light up. Or students, for example, they have so much energy. They're just, when we take them on mountains to run wild, and just have them bombarded with a theme, there's nothing like it. So if you can find the time, I promise you won't regret it. And we had our grade 9 group, the first group to do all 3 years of IMYC. They just graduated from, of course, the IMYC program. They're moving into IGCSE. And when we asked what were your most memorable moments, etc., they were expounding on every single thing that was a hands-on activity or a trip. Apparently, COVID-19, all of the great entry points I've done were more of a blur when compared. It's not that it was, but when they were outshone, if you want to put it that way, when compared to just these. So shutting down a day, you may think, I'm losing contact time. Why would I want to do this? But it's so much more meaningful. And when you engage the students properly, it's like the rest is a breeze. It's like you've greased the place and you just slide along, and they're just learning because you've done the due diligence. So I think about it as an investment for a better return than a loss.
That's a great point. And you basically need to invest in that hook to pull them in and keep
Indeed.
them going, right? Through the learning process. Very well said. So why do you think it is important to take the time out of a busy school schedule to hook and engage students in their learning first instead of just jumping into the learning? You've just said already that it's an investment, but are there any other reasons?
I think it's important for us to understand that as teachers or as educators, we're fighting battles we don't need to be fighting. What I mean by that is, okay, all the neuroscientific research has taught us that the brain learns by association and it learns by relevance, particularly when it comes to this age group. If the science is already telling us that their brains are going to prune out anything that it deems to be irrelevant or not connected to anything, our greatest jobs as teachers is to establish relevance. That's just hands down, right? And so they can tell you what Kim Kardashian did last week. They can tell you they know the lyrics to every single song. But when you come in and you taught them something on Monday, it's Wednesday, and they're like, Miss, you did not teach us that. And you feel betrayed as a teacher, like, oh my gosh, what am I doing with my life? And so the reality is the brain has deemed Kim Kardashian relevant because it's connected to what their friends like and it's on social media, on TikTok, it's on everything. And how do we get science, geography, all these different things to also be connected to something? It's through the engagement, it's through the entry points. That's just the reality. It's like having a junkyard in front of you. The information to us established teachers is so organized and it's just so relevant in and of itself. And for the students, we throw all this information and content at them, and it's like a junkyard in front of them. And what does the brain do with clutter? It sweeps it out. It's like, all right, let's get rid of it. But what do you do when you're able to say, okay, everything I'm going to teach you for the next 6 weeks is going to be connected to this theme, adaptability. In science, we're going to look at how organisms adapt, for example, or in Spanish or in modern languages, we're going to look at how people change their clothes in different, how do they dress in different Spanish countries or things like that. In geography, let's look at how the weather changes as the tilt of the axis or whatever. Now we're looking at adaptability, and the brain is able to not create a junkyard from everything teachers are teaching, but they're able to create schema or schemata, right? Structured, organized concepts so that the brain doesn't feel like they need to throw it away. So if we don't establish that engagement, if we do not have entry points or something similar, we're really just shooting our own selves in the feet. And then we'll blame the students too, right? They just aren't focused. Science is saying these are the requirements, these are the needs of the adolescent brain. We either acknowledge it because we're fighting with biology, right? We acknowledge it and we do what we need to do from a biological standpoint to ensure our students are empowered to learn meaningfully, or we continue here thinking that time is the most valuable thing as opposed to engagement. And so we continue just teaching and holding on to that time, think it's the most valuable thing, and we'll be fighting a losing battle for sure.
Yeah, I think you summing that up. It's not just it's investment, but it's also going with the science, not fighting against what is happening naturally within an adolescent as they're growing up. And I love your analogy of the junkyard. I mean, that is a perfect way of looking at teaching content and teaching information, that it can be so scattered and so I don't know what to do with this, that it does feel like maybe that we need to clean it and we don't really pay attention to it. So yeah, great analogy there. So tell me about a time in your teaching and as an IMYC coordinator when you saw that the entry point impacted student learning. What happened?
All right. I think so the thing is, I think in general, when I think of entry points, all of them have been meaningful. Um, I think that the students have really gotten an appreciation for just how content relates to the big idea, the theme, etc. And I think one of the benefits is we have a session called a session that is set aside where students get to meet in groups and discuss how everything connects. One of the things that I'll say is one of the biggest themes for us was identity for our grade 9 students. When we were looking at identity, what we found was not only from a place of history, because they were talking about history, and just in world history, they were speaking about how the African continent has been exploited, and just all the different things. And when we were doing our exit point, one of the students said, "I've realized all my life that I hate myself." And this student is one of our students who is quite, he doesn't speak much, he's very quiet, etc. And he just blurted it out, and everybody just went silent for a minute, like. And what we find is content, of course, is enhanced when the students do entry points. That's hands down. I can't even identify a single one because it's so consistent within our school. But I think a bigger thing is the content in history along with the theme, or the content in a subject along with the theme now becomes personal. And when something becomes personal, that's meaningful learning to a level that is beyond, just what we can imagine. When it becomes personal, when it relates to us, we see it with adaptability, with other themes as well. And I keep bringing up adaptability because that's a big one for the students. When they start to say, to be honest, I want to now confess that I actually hate my little brother. Since he came around, I don't get any attention, and so they're bringing, it's so personal for them as they look at all the different things, including our social and emotional curriculum. Everything with IMYC is the glue. It kind of just knits everything together in a way that we haven't been able to establish without it.
Wow, and that's really powerful, what you said about what that student saying that. Could you elaborate further? What went after that? Tell me more.
Right. Well, what's interesting is for our grade 9 students, they decided that they were going to rally around him to ensure that he was able to love himself more. And I think he was speaking to things that, I think it was compounded. So he understood now the history of why do we, so within Jamaica, I can't speak to other places, but why we may see perhaps not races, but persons of different skin tones, or why we may respond to colorism the way we do, etc. And within our school, he's not one of the lighter toned ones, if you want to put it that way, to get into a sensitive topic. But what's interesting is because of the history and because of identity, and everything being meshed together, the students, we left that session actually saying our job is to make this student love themselves. By the time we group up again, this student should be reporting of how different persons affirm them. So teachers, for example, on the corridors when seeing that particular student would just intentionally say something affirming, whether it's, I like your curly hair, things that didn't, probably you don't think about because you're focused on pedagogy or just other things. And so what we found was, yes, it sounds like a story that is focused on that singular student, but it empowered our teachers and our students to be caring, to empower their peers, to not just be self-seeking or self-focused, but to have empathy. Our school is very diverse, but one of the things is that within our country, Jamaica, you have the masses, you have the persons who cannot afford an international education and who do go to public schools. And then you have international schools, of which we are one and the largest one. And from that, you may have certain people being a little bit underrepresented when they get into our context. It was a great opportunity to address, something that we probably as teachers don't even think of, because we believe we believe it, that we create a space that is very inclusive. It's in the core of everything that we do. We are a school that believes in all students feeling accepted, respected, and that like they belong. But sometimes when we are portraying that, and it's in our mission, it's in our vision, it's in our everything, sometimes internally what a student is feeling for whatever reasons is not that. So it empowered us to live what our very vision as a school is.
Wow, and through looking at that big idea, finding that sense of inclusion for that student and feeling, yeah, like you said, having that sense of love and
Right.
empowerment. I think you said that really well, that the sense of our through the IMYC and through the big idea and through the entry points and all of what is happening in the process to facilitate learning, when it becomes personal, then it becomes powerful.
Right.
It becomes something stronger for students to not just remember, but carry those lessons for the rest of their lives. And that sounds like one of them.
Indeed.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So, Leighanne, we love takeaways here. You've given great analogies, great stories already. Is there something that you would like, one takeaway you would like the listeners and viewers to know about with your time and experience with the IMYC?
Okay, so the good thing for me is I got the opportunity to see my school before IMYC. And I'm able to see the after. I'm able to see us lose those sessions, lose, quote and unquote, those sessions every 6 weeks. I'm able to see, however, the returns. And so I guess a big takeaway, though we've stressed it, before, is that the benefits and the returns, the interest on your investment that you get from allowing students to become engaged, and even just the entire cycle, the IMYC learning cycle altogether, the benefits that you get far outweigh the investment. And so see it as that, as such, as an investment. You can come for me personally, okay, if it doesn't work out, because I promise you, I can put my head on a block that you will be blown away as an educator, because you will find that some of the things you've been fighting for so long, the answer was right there in biology. It was right there in neuroscience. You just needed to look. And once you found it, you're just like, okay, whew, it's good now, right? So I encourage you, invest in the time for engagement. It works.
That is fantastic. Thoughts, stories, advice, and a great takeaway to leave on. Leighanne, thank you so much for your time today and sharing all the insights. It was a very powerful conversation. I appreciate it so much. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.